Hi, in this video I'm excited to demonstrate some of the core features and functionality of our incredibly flexible X-FX bundle of 9 Max for Live audio effects that integrate with our global hub and X-Relay system. To install X-FX, once you have unzipped the folder, we recommend you drag it into your user library, presets, audio effects, Max audio effect folder. This is to ensure that all the X-Effects and presets will be ingested into Live's browser for future searches. However, because the package includes our modulators, also known as Mod Squad, if you've already downloaded Mod Squad, it might duplicate some of those devices. Either way, it's crucial that the entire X-Effects folder remain intact so that the presets can draw upon the correct file structure and properly load. For further information, you can review the user manual included in the folder, and at any point, click on Live's info view to get further information on any device. What is included in X-Effects? If you open the X-Effects folder, to access the actual X-Effects, you'll need to open the X-Effects folder, which includes the Max audio effects, and you'll see X-Comb, X-Connect, X-Delay, X-Divide, X-Filter, X-FM, X-Harmonizer, X-Torsion, and X-Reverb. In the presets folder, you'll find a bunch of great starting points and racks demonstrating a full complement of X-Effects capabilities. But let's begin with some core concepts. I'll start with the drums here. I've got a very simple drum pattern, and right now I've got an X-Comb, which is not at all affecting because the dry wet is at 0%. As I put it to 100%, we can hear the comb filtration, which remains in key with the selected scale and key specified by this instance of Global Hub. So everything will be in the Aeolian scale and the key of C throughout my set. And so long as the Global Hub icon is activated, these are grayed out, just sort of indicating that while you can change them momentarily, they're controlled by Global Hub and will be saved with your set with the settings of Global Hub. However, I can store them locally by switching to the pin mode. And if I change them, when I switch back to global mode, it will inherit the global scale and key settings. And now you'll notice in Aeolian C, as I advance the note dial, it skips C sharp because C sharp is not in the scale of C minor. Same with E and F sharp, for example. Now I would need to increase the feedback and feed forward as well, perhaps, to really hear. Now there's a bit of a glide time on this as well, and that's just to smooth the transitions from one note to the next. And we've got a limiter on by default, just in case the feedback and feed forward get a little bit out of control or unruly. And I start by showing you this because you'll notice here on the X-Torsion, which we'll look at later on, the output settings are identical for all X-Effects, as are the input effects. And the input section allows me to specify which signal is processed by the effect. And right now, all of the signal above minus infinite dB is being processed 100%. And right now, I actually want to just process signal above 18 minus 18 dB. And when peaks exceed minus 18 dB, we can specify the attack and decay time. Now, that doesn't govern the degree of the feedback and feed forward, but it's the attack of the signal going into the comb or delay or whichever X effect we're using. And we can impose a bit of a fade in with that attack slope as well. There's by default 1 millisecond on there to keep things a bit smoother. And we can invert which realm of a signal is being affected by switching to below mode. So now it's only signal below minus 18 dB that's being passed through the comb filter. So that produces a much different result when I adjust the dry wet again, but I'm just leaving it all the way wet for now to hear the differences. So I'll switch back to above, and then I can toggle this into a crossover mode. So now the effects will just be applied to signal above the specified crossover frequency. So instead of determining which signal is being affected by dynamic range or amplitude, we're affecting it by crossover frequency, and similarly we can set it to below. So now it's only processing signal below the specified crossover. But for now, I'll switch it back to threshold and set it back to above. And now we can play around with the X comb in a little greater detail. Now, again, these input processing controls are the same for every X-FX device. And we can, of course, increase or attenuate the input and output gain. And this is another reason the limiter comes in handy. So, yeah, by default, we are in notes mode. And we can detune it a little bit with some stereo differential. And hopefully you're hearing the melodic nature of the notes, which are conforming to the Aeolian C scale. But we can also switch it to a standard time-based comb filter. And it will try its best to switch seamlessly between the notes and time value. Now, one important thing you may notice about X-FX is a lack of any modulation, and that's because we created Mod Squad in order to provide every type of modulation you could hope for. So the idea is that the X-FX works seamlessly with the included Mod Squad modulators to perform any kind of modulation you might wish. So let me just go ahead and grab, for example, the LFO-X that we've created, and I have a little idea of how I might want to use it. And there is one odd feature of all modulators that work with live with the X-FX, which is that if we map them, we have to set the glide time to 0. In order for the LFO to control it properly. Now I'm going to go ahead and set this to a 1 bar. And I think I want to reset it every 2 bars. I don't want it to go quite so high. So, this is a quick look at modulating some of the LFO features, but if I switch to one of the other modes, it's no longer modulating because these all show up as different parameters. So if I want to modulate the time value, I would have to map it the same, but you notice it goes in the opposite direction. So I'm going to go ahead and set it from 42 to 0. I'm not sure if that makes quite so much sense. Maybe I wanted to go 100 to 58. I think that's more like it. Okay, and then finally, we've got the relay mode, and this is crucial. We recently released our X-Relay device, and I've got an instance of a bass track over here that's being sent on relay conduit 1. Now you can watch our full video for how the X-Relay devices work, but I've got this bass line here, and if I have this set to receive on relay 1, then we can hear the modulation of the X comb corresponding to those bass notes, and I can transpose it to really hear the difference a little better. So this allows us to create all kinds of dynamic relationships between different elements throughout a live set. And of course, everything going through the X-Relay also remains quantized to the global hub, scale, and key. So let's go ahead and take a look at our bass. On the bass, I have a filter, and the filter also quantizes to notes. And this is quite useful for adding resonance to a kick drum, for example. Tuned resonance, of course. Now, we've already got enough low frequency here, so I don't really see the value of that. But I can use it to receive notes on a relay, a different relay, let's say. Or actually, yes, let's let it receive on the same relay that it's being sent to. And now it's going to add a resonant boost at the specific MIDI note values that the track is playing. Now I'm going to transpose it down 2 octaves. Now transposing it down 1 octave, we get a real strong lift there, and I think at this point X filter by default, because most people use filters in an absolute manner, it's set by default to 100% wet, but I'm going to go ahead and switch it to 50% wet so we can hear the original signal coming through. So now I've added this resonant boost 1 octave below itself, and it's receiving its own notes on that same relay, so it's boosting the same notes as being played. But I could use this in a notch filter to duck the specific frequencies from another track. It gets very intricate, the kinds of mappings you can do here. And of course, I could also specify to only process or boost the signal that's already below 200 Hertz by switching the crossover in such a way. And now I've got this really lifted, inflated low-end sub material compared to without the X filter. Now I think it might be useful to try out the pads here. And I'm not going to worry about the X-Relay so much, but it does really expand the capability here. I'm going to use the XFM, which allows me to use frequency modulation to adjust any sound anywhere in my set. So I've got this very low tuned sine wave And the sine wave that's modulating it is going to remain in that C Aeolian scale. Whether the actual output remains in that scale depends on the incoming signal. So it's not guaranteed to make sure the output is in that scale, but it does kind of constrain the input to a more diatonic array of possibilities. Now I've increased the modulation to 100%, and now I can switch to, for example, a pulse wave, which has a pulse width factor as well. And I can do something fun with the LFO-X here, which is, let's just go ahead and drop it after the XFM, and I'm going to switch that to a synchronized time rate of, let's say, every bar, and I'll switch it to a random shape with a bit of smoothing, and then map that to the note here. And I have to, once again, because I have modulation control, I must disable the glide time. And I might want to constrain the range again, maybe 75 to 25 or so. Okay, so we also have a pulse width option in the triangle mode. And I can also specify a threshold or a crossover. Perhaps a crossover would be useful here. But where it gets really interesting is selecting the self or the noise mode, in which case the randomization of the note is irrelevant because there are no notes in noise mode. Noise is full frequency, it can't really be tuned. Now get this, I can select an external FM modulation input source. And this gives me two chooser menus, so I'll select the drum kit. And let's do post effects, just so that we can hear it with the drums muted. So you can hear now that drum kit modulating this pad signal. So the frequency of the drums is modulating everything coming from the pads. It's above, in this case, 360 hertz now. I can specify to also just get, for example, the hi-hats. And then we can rebalance the dry-wet. So that just makes the frequency modulation a little more dynamic. I'm going to switch to the interpolation mode of the X-Comb, which I haven't looked at yet. So all of these X-FX feature the option to switch between a standard dry-wet blend or an interpolation mode, by which, when signal exceeds the threshold specified here, it goes to whatever this dry-wet level would be. So that means when the signal is below -23, it's dry. When it's above -23, it is 86.6% wet. So it's remixing itself in the interpolation mode. So I might want to use this a little bit later on. But right now I simply want to disable the X-Comb. And I want to explore the reverb and delay that I have on the sends. So first of all, trigger my chords. And on the X-Verb, you see all the standard input and output controls, but by default, it's set in time. And we have a pre-delay control also available in time, and the fade in as well. This can be useful for creating some reverse type effects, but let's look at using the BPM control. So we can have a tuned reverb, which is useful with the feedback circuit, which I will explore momentarily. But one thing I really like to do here is turn the crossover on, because I don't want any frequencies below, say, 753 to even reach the reverb. Now you'll see the bass rate is quite short. I want the bass rate to be 1 bar, a whole note. And I want it to be 4 whole notes long. So now I can specify my reverb length in metrical intervals. That's convenient. I can also put some resonant damping on there through the post-circuit low-pass filter. We can switch this filter to being pre, so it's 753 and then below 464 being sent to the reverb. But I like to place it after, and then I can exaggerate the width. And the pre-delay can also be set in metrical intervals. So let's try a dotted 16th note. Nice. Maybe 8th note is more appropriate. Yeah, that's working. Sixteenth, I think, is perfect. Now let's increase the feedback. Now you have to be very careful with the feedback. There's a reason it only goes to 95%, and it's another good reason to have the limiter in line here. So the feedback might be a little more interesting with shorter reverb times. But this is a basic look at the BPM controlled reverberation. You might be wondering why you would use notes or relay. Well, basically you can do some really interesting sound design with super short tuned reverb times. Now here I have an X-Delay, and I'm going to send it. And it's a very short delay time. I probably want to put it to 100% wet as it is on a return channel. Okay, so I think it would be useful for a dub delay to switch to a BPM rate. So at 128th notes, we can be really specific with our timing, but I think I'll just go to 16th notes. We've got an exaggerated feedback. Filtration. Okay, nothing too exciting there. Obviously, we have all the threshold and crossover controls. But where it gets quite interesting is perhaps adding some modulation. Yes? So I think what I'm going to do is take the audio sample and hold, so that when signal exceeds the threshold, it will change the base rate of the delay time. Now I need to constrain the range quite a bit. I think I'll smooth it slightly. So now every time it detects a new note, it will change the base rate multiplier. And so it's how many 16th notes. In case that wasn't clear, this is part of the vocabulary and timing controls of all our other devices. You select a base rate, in this case 16th notes, and a multiplier. So now it's currently 8 16th notes. And I think I might reduce the threshold because some of these chords are a bit quiet. There we go, it's detecting it a little better now. But now it's maybe a little too sensitive to when notes end. Once again, I think I'll constrain that range a bit. So, a little fine-tuning is the name of the game here. And of course, I could do this to 30-second notes. Get some glitchier, shorter times. And then there's no shortage of the X-FX we can use in a chain here. So I could then go ahead and degrade this delay signal with a bit of noise-based XFM. And maybe we want to put that before the delay line even. Adjust the crossover perhaps. Okay, that's starting to sound pretty nice. Now, one effect we haven't looked at yet is the X-Harmonizer, and I think I'll stop all the clips and just play this sample of my voice. This is a recording of my voice. Now, in auto mode, it's auto-tuning my voice to the selected scale and key. I'm going to put it to 100% so we can really hear it. Now, there might be some latency, and with my current latency settings, I adjusted the track delay back minus 81 milliseconds, and that seemed to work nicely. So we have some quality controls. How much humanization with a deviation we can allow. How much sibilance is allowed and how much ambience is allowed through. Now I can switch it to a shift mode where I can control the shift, again within the scale and key specified here. This is a recording of my voice. And this is a recording of my voice. I have the option this is a recording of my voice. To also, of course, set it to a relay. And if I press play on the bass, this is a recording of my voice. This is a I can flip it so it's going to play higher notes on the keyboard. The flip is basically inverting the incoming MIDI pitches. So then I might want to transpose them down, but it's going with the bass. This is a recording of my voice. But it's not following it exactly. So because it's inverted, it's harmonizing with it, but still in the scale and key. Now I can add the shifts. And these are two extra tunings that also remain conformed to the selected scale and key. And I'm going to turn the shift 2 off. So shift 1, I'll set it to 100%. It's got a panning control, and I will pitch it. So now I can do some real harmonic shifting with a bit of detune in hertz. And now I've got the stereo shift. So shift 1, transposition, detuning, panning, and dry wet. So we can have these sort of blended a little bit with the incoming shifted, relay shifted signal. And of course we can cross over threshold and do all that sort of stuff. The tuning, of course, is the degree to which the incoming sample is being shifted. And you can put this on drums and all kinds of other audio sources for interesting results. So I've got this X-Torsion, which is a severe tunable sample rate and digital distortion circuit. And right now, I want it to only distort signal above minus 12 dB. So we've got our tunable sample rate here, bit reduction, and I can turn the tunable sample rate off and on. We've got a decimation circuit, hard clipping, soft clipping, and a bit of downsampling with pre or post filtration. Now, X-Divide allows me to divide signal between what's below the threshold and what's above it, and we can blend between the two. And pan them separately. And we can specify an attack time for what's above the threshold, a transition to what's below the threshold, and a decay out from there before the next attack phase takes effect. And of course, we can set the thresholds here. We've got a limiter on the output, and we can also set it by a crossover frequency, which allows us to exaggerate the notch or the distance between the above and below. So we're imposing an exaggerated gap between the two. And this can all be useful if you rack it up and process the signal in two different ways. That's really the main utilitarian purpose of it. If I go, for example, to the pads and use the X-Connect, I can merge two signals together. So I'm going to mute the drums again and select to receive them here. So there's the drums here now harnessed on the pads track, which allows me to process it in a variety of ways. Of course, I can pan it, and crucially, I can interpolate it with the pad, but the pad is not really exceeding the threshold in a meaningful way. But we can do a dual crossover mode where the pads are above the crossover and the incoming input is below the crossover. We can swap which one it's controlling here by going from track to external. And this is the dual crossover mode here. When threshold is selected, this is not available. But we can specify the threshold for the external input. So we can say, only take signal above minus 18 from the kit and blend it here to this degree. Now, maybe you want to just take the effect signal from a particular track, but it allows you to combine these all in a variety of imaginative ways. The more you play around with it, especially adding the modulators and combining these devices into racks, the possibilities really are endless to embed new relationships between different parts of your set, with all kinds of tuned following through the relays, through the many modulators included, or just controlling the filter, for example, in the scale and key. There's no end to the possibilities here, and we are super excited to hear what you do with these devices.